just so next
Oh,
page.
it's up there behind the curtain.
Okay, so it's just the next page then.
She shouldn't just say the next page and go.
I think so.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the work session tonight. We got the date right on the TV. 12th of January.
Just for
I
you.
don't have my agenda here, but this is our first of two work sessions this evening that we are going to, there's an agenda right here. First, go through the audit work session. We have members of Melanson as well as the audit committee. Do we have everybody from the audit committee? Just
Jesse had to run up to Gunstock to get a sick child who's skiing.
oh, bummers. It's ski night tonight?
Terrible night for making that drive.
Yeah.
And Hawks should be here shortly.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right. And we also have our finance team, Judy Belanger, and I think it's Andrew in the back. Our goal is to go through introduction from City Manager Conard, the presentation, questions and answers, and at the end of that, we'll have public comment. Sound like a plan?
Sounds
All right.
good.
Over to you, City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, everyone here and watching at home. It's my pleasure, really, to just introduce Judy, who will introduce the team from Melanson. And one of the things Judy and I think is most important to let folks know, both at home and those who watch the meeting afterward, that we now have available some documents that would be helpful for them to know about, and Judy'd like to introduce those as well as the team. Judy,
Okay,
thanks.
and good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Audit Committee, and the team from Melanson. As Alina and Scott will go over the annual comprehensive financial report, this is a very detailed, the name states, very detailed comprehensive report providing information about the financial position of the city. At the same time that we prepare this report, we're also preparing what is known as the Popular Annual Financial Report, or the PAFRA. So I just wanted to kind of introduce this. This report is very short. It's only like 29 pages. It is intended to extract financial information from our ACFR report, putting it in a means that is very readable, in extracting really pertinent information that might be most valuable to the citizens, instead of including everything that's in the comprehensive annual financial report. This is our 7th publication of this report, and it also, in addition to some financial information, it also has information on certain departments, some statistical information, some programs, some highlights, and every year we like to pick like a spotlight page. This year we used the Portsmouth Climate Action Plan and outline what's coming up in the future for that to take place. Most importantly, it outlines ways for citizens to stay engaged. So there's information in here about the budget process, how to stay engaged, listening groups, and things like that for them to be aware of. And this report is also online, and it's probably the best way to read this report because it's an interactive report. There's a lot of links that will bring you right to pertinent information and programs related to parking and public works, and it's just full of all kinds of information. So we have hard copies we'll be distributing here at City Hall, also at the Senior Activity Center, in various places throughout the city, and we'll make more copies if necessary. But again, the best way to read it is online. So I just wanted to highlight that, introduce that. I left a few in the lobby and in the back table. Feel free to take some, hand them out, and if we need to publish more, we will. So with that, I'd like to introduce Alina Korsak from Melanson and Scott McIntyre from Melanson.
Thank you, Judy. Good evening. I'm Alina Korsak. I'm the principal in charge of the City of Portsmouth Independent Financial Statement Audit for fiscal year ended June 30, 2022, and I'm here to present some of these audit results. Next page, please. Our agenda for tonight is just to have a brief overview of those results and briefly touch on what a financial statement audit is. And as Judy pointed out, we're going to go through some of the highlights that are disclosed in your annual comprehensive financial report, or the ACFRA. Once again, we had a successful and timely audit. Thank you to the management team and everyone here. We did not note any significant deficiencies or material weaknesses in the management letter. And what is the financial statement audit? We as auditors look at all the material accounts that the City of Portsmouth has, and we get the supporting documentation and do a testing on it in accordance with the auditing standards for the purpose of expressing an opinion on those financial statements. And management's function is to safeguard assets and ensure proper financial reporting that we can express an opinion on. So to go through on the next page a little bit more on what a financial statement audit is. This, of course, is not all-inclusive because we're not going to be here all night talking about all the audit steps, but this is just a brief summary of what some of those procedures are. We go through control testing, for example. In vendor cycle, we would take a sample, we would then trace it to support an invoice, audit trail over approval process and the proper accounts that it hit in the general ledger. Payroll, for example, we would test to timesheets and contracts and, again, audit process over the approval of those and where it hit in the general ledger to make sure it was properly classified. So it's just different type of steps we do during these control testing cycles. And some other control testing we do is what we call walkthroughs. We walk through an area like a treasury cycle, tax cycle, general ledger, and closing cycle. But most of what we do is what we call substantive in-depth procedures. So we substantively test cash, receivables, and we look through and see how your accounts are in compliance with your procedures and policies overall. We see your actuarial reports, we see your debt documents. So we go through all different areas, legal documents as well, with the purpose of concluding on every fund, every material item that it is properly and materially fairly stated. And if necessary, you simply plan over any type of auditing procedures that the auditing standards allow us to use. On the ACFRA, congratulations, the city had it for so many years. It looks like 29 years. 2021 is the last award that the city got. Just submitted 2022, and I'm sure the city will get another wonderful award to put on the wall. So congratulations for so many years of getting this ACFRA award. The ACFRA is really 3 sections: transmittal, basic financial statements, statistical section. The transmittal letter is something that's not audited, provided by management, and it really talks about the city profile, the local economy, long-term financial planning, and relevant financial policies. And then auditor's report is really the only thing that belongs to us. And as you can see, we have unmodified opinion there, and unmodified means that there was no modification necessary to the city's financial statements that require them to be in compliance with generally accepted accounting principles, or what we call GAAP. Following that, we have the management discussion analysis, what we call MD&A, and that is a great resource, has wonderful financial highlights on what the city is doing. So it's just quick financial highlights on different areas. It's unaudited, provided by management. And then we are going into the dual perspective financial statements. So that's really the big part. So we start with the government-wide financial statements, which are on accrual basis or long-term perspective. And then fund financial statements, which depend on the type of funds it is. So if it's a governmental fund, like general funds, special revenue funds, permanent funds, capital project funds, those are on modified accrual basis. And then if it's an enterprise fund, or like water sewer, or if it's a fiduciary fund, those are on accrual basis. So short-term perspective is the modified accrual, and then the enterprise funds, fiduciary would be accrual. And then following that is the notes to financial statements. It's a big section. It basically goes into detail for any material account disclosed, and there's some of them do require a lot to be disclosed, like pension, for example, probably will take you a few pages, and so whatever the standards required to be disclosed, it's some of them are a little bit extensive, and then followed by required supplementary information, the RSI, and that's pension and OPEB, and then supplementary statements and schedules, and that's the individual combining statements that go into the front to the different areas in the basic financial statements. And then the last section is the statistical section. Another really great section because there's so much data there. It's so much history there. So it provides the users with a historical background on how the city performed using multi-year data. It's another unaudited section provided by management. So we'll start with the budget versus actual for general fund. If anybody's following in the ACRA, it's PDF page 56, document page 50. Revenues exceeded budget by about $2 million. The two highest categories of that was other revenue, exceeded by $728,000, mostly due to dental and workers' comp holiday premium, and then intergovernmental revenue exceeded by $591,000, mostly due to meals and tax distribution. Now, anything that has to do with that, you go back to the MD&A, and and management provides a nice summary of these significant changes. So on PDF, it's page 41, and document page 35. And then for expenditures, we had excess unspent appropriations of $4 million, which is right on the following page, PDF 42 and document page 36. You could see that most of that came from $2 million unspent from non-operating appropriation, primarily due to $2 million state park appropriation that was not utilized. So the budgetary surplus overall is $6 million. And then on the following page, this is your general fund unassigned fund balance and how it did for the last 5 years. So you could see it's nicely, steadily going up slightly. And on page 39, PDF, document page 33, again going back to MD&A, that's where you have your policy disclosed. So it's 10 to 17% is your general fund unassigned fund balance that is of general fund appropriation is where you want it to be. So on that page, you see the explanation that it went up $793,000 from prior year. And most of that, you could go back to the budget versus actual page, for example, and where we saw the $6 million budgetary surplus. But keeping in mind that there was over $5 million that was used from fund balance. So that's pretty much your primary factors on why it went up by $790,000. So it's $6 million less than over $5 million that you used from your fund balance. So on the next page, like I said, your policy is to have 10 to 17% of general fund appropriation for unassigned fund balance, and you could nicely see on the following page where it's right in the middle of your target, so right where you want it to be. So it's been between 13 to 14% for the last 5 years, so nice and consistent. And then we'll go into our bonds and long-term loans payable. So we'll start with the bottom because that's your, we start with governmental activities. In financial statements, that's blue. So you could see that that slightly decreased by 5% for governmental debt payable. And then we'll go to the next one, the purple, which is water, and it up a little bit, 12%. Now the next one, green, is, it looks a little deceiving, but it's not really 147% up as it appears because it includes a $76 million Pierce Island wastewater treatment plant special revolving fund loan program from the state of New Hampshire. That was already in a payable last year, but it was in a short-term loan payable because the project hasn't been finalized yet. And now the project is finalized. Now it's long-term payable. So the sewer Pierce Island of 76 million is now added into the green. And then on the following page, we'll talk a little bit about pension. This, of course, is as the city as part of the New Hampshire retirement system. So the way it gets measured is based on the prior year. So at 6/30/21, it was about 1% that city share was of the New Hampshire retirement system. Now, it looks like it went down a lot, but because it's another one of those that looks a little deceiving because it's based on a prior year, so the investment performance was way exceeding its expectation for that year.
So in your 6/30/22 ACFR, the pension liability is measured as of 6/31/21. I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. So therefore, your liability went down. You'll notice the other trend next year, because next year you'll be measured as of 6/30/22, reporting for 6/30/23, and the investments have been in the negative. So for investment, it's investment loss instead of huge significant gain like the previous year. So it's going to go the other way. Now, I just wanted to point out that the net pension liability is also disclosed in your balance sheet, the PDF page 49, document page 43. The note that is a little extensive is PDF page 89, document page 83. Interesting that the contributions did go up as expected for fiscal year 22 and 23 because they're set 2 years at a time, was 13.75 up to 30.67% of earnable wages that the city had to contribute. Now, the interesting piece is that fiscal year 23 to 25, it slightly went down 13 to 27 to 28.68% that the city has to contribute from earnable wages. And fiscal year 23 has something I haven't seen before. It's a one-time state contribution, 7.5% of contributions. So that is something interesting that's coming up this upcoming fiscal year. And that's really like the major highlights that are included in your ACFRA. The reports that we issue is, as I said, the opinion on your financial statements, and I mentioned its opinion on the basic financial statements. So the opinion does not cover the introductory section, the transmittal section, the MD&A, RSI, or the statistical section in the back. And we've also issued a governance letter, and that's just standard required communication that we issue every year. Just talks about that we didn't have any disagreements with management, we didn't have any incorrect statements. It just covers a lot of what's required to cover back to the governing body. And then the management letter, as I mentioned, no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. So it's just a comment to prepare, a standard comment to prepare for the new GASBs, which for fiscal year 23, there's going to be GASB 94, which is on private-public partnerships and APAs, availability arrangements, and then GASB 96, which is similar to GASB 87. They both have similarities with that, where GASB 96 is what they call SPIDA, subscription-based information technology arrangements, that are going to have to be reported similar to the leases that the city implemented for the last fiscal year, 22. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. Well, I also wanted to mention before I turn it over to the mayor that Scott McIntyre is here, and he is here in case there are any questions on firm merger. We merged into Markham. So if there's any lingering questions about the firm, a merger, or any other lingering questions, he's happy to answer those. So with that, I just want to turn it to the mayor for questions.
Thank you so much. Well, I'll pass it back to the council. Are there any questions on this report? And thank you so much for not only attending, but all of the work that you've done on behalf of the city of Portsmouth. It's greatly appreciated. Councilor Bagler.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. If you could just, maybe for the folks at home, kind of explain why the city uses accrual. And, a lot of us that work in the private sector, revenues are typically consistent month to month. But with the city, even though we get revenues every month, we have 2 months in particular where we get the vast majority of the revenue. Could you just kind of explain just
Yeah.
what that means, if you were comparing this to a typical business.
So you guys are familiar with accrual, the typical business. Modified accrual is different, and of course, your main fund, the general fund, is a governmental fund, so it's at modified accrual basis. The basis for that is measurable and available. So what happens is when you record receivables, it doesn't automatically go to revenue. It has to be measurable and available. So so at year end is, for example, you would not have it at revenue. So to close the books, you need to make sure that you have what they call deferred inflows of resources, except you are allowed per governmental accounting GAAP, the principles accounting and auditing principle. You are allowed to have up to 60-day recognition. So GASB basically says available measurement means something that you already have on hand or shortly after year end. So any receivable is offset by deferred inflows except for up to 60 days after year end, what physically came in for revenue. So that is a different way of doing revenue booking. So if you're looking for consistent month-to-month revenue, the biggest revenue here is taxes. It's not gonna be consistent. So it is based, and the city is Portsmouth is one of the only very few that the way it bills taxes where there's no large unearned revenue because it's in arrears. So it's basically recognizing everything in revenue except anything that came in after the 60 days after year end. So I don't know if that was clear, or do you want me to go into more?
No, I think that's clear. I know if somebody looks at like monthly reports, it can look a little unsettling at times because it's not as consistent as it would be as if, say, we were selling sneakers or something, because when we get the two tax bills in, it has a huge effect. So the months before and the months after look like our revenue is off, if you will.
I just had to look at your general fund revenues and expenditures, and it's 97 million in property tax revenue and 124 in total. So unfortunately, I can't do that math to tell you what percentage that is, but it's really a high percentage, and you're collecting it all in 2 months of the year. And one of the things Alina was pointing out was you collect those in arrears. There are other governments in the state that when they converted many years ago from a calendar year to a fiscal year, they set the structure to collect in advance of the fiscal year instead of after the fiscal year has begun. You're collecting 50% of your revenues after you've spent 5 months worth of your appropriation, approximately speaking. So.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to speak to the pensions, if I may. And I have a handout, which, if I could send those around, please. This is similar to a memo that the Audit Committee looked at the beginning of the calendar year, last January. And things have changed a little bit, but not significantly. In essence, based, and here a lot of these numbers are drawn on the New Hampshire Retirement System website and publications, but they're also reflected in the ACFR. The retirement funds managed by New Hampshire are about 2/3 funded, 65%. Now they bumped up to about 72% at the end of June 30, 2021 because of the bull market in equities in particular. But then with the subsequent correction, dropped back down to 65%. So it's sensitive to market returns. But what does 65% mean? It means really that a retiree has a 2/3 probability that they're going to have their retirement expectations met by the retirement fund. And management of the retirement system has clearly stated that 65% is not what their goal is. Even 80%, which is sort of a number which is bandied about by cognoscenti for retirement, 80% would be great, but New Hampshire retirement system management has stated that their goal is really 100%, which is what it really should be. And in fact, law suggests that that's required. So the pension assets are tremendously underfunded, and that represents a potential liability to the city in terms of how are we going to meet that call on retirement assets when all 763 of our employees are fully retired. So that goes to the funding ratio discussion. And I attach an article about the 80% pension funding myth, which comes from the retirement system, that's really a funding myth, and that 100% is what's necessary. The second point that I wanted to focus on is that we use the same number, 6.75%, as a discount rate for a future stream of pension obligations, and also for the assumed retirement or return on retirement funds. And there, I attach a second article which really goes to the point that that's erroneous. We really should not be using the same number. We need to be judging these concepts in very different light from each other. The 6.7% anticipated return for investments is probably about right, given that the Fed is tightening and we've got higher inflation rates. But the discount on future pension obligations, 6.7% is too high a number. And if you want to get an example of the sensitivity, which comes actually from the ACFR, and it's on the second page of my memo, a 1% decrease in that discount rate from 6.75% to 5.75% increases, because that discount rate is in the denominator. So a lower number will actually make a larger result. It goes from 87 million, which was on the graph that Alina showed us, to 125 million, an increase of almost 38 million, or a 44% increase in the potential liability for just the city's retirement funds, not to mention the state's. That is a huge increase. And now, is that a reasonable assumption? Well, if you take a look at the corporate market from pensions and investments, the average discount rate for corporate pensions rose actually from 5.36% as of September 30 of this last year to 5.71% as of October 31st, getting up close to the 5.75% that's shown in the example. So the higher the discount rate, the more fully funded the pension plan. But our 6.75% current discount rate is much too optimistic, and it really should be much lower if we're going to be closer to what the corporate discount rate is of 5.71%. So in many ways, we are underrepresenting the potential liability, future liability to the city for the pension funds, and which is very concerning. And I think that, is that an issue which really resides here in the city? Yes, but it more importantly resides with the state. And the state pension service is woefully underfunded relative to the projected needs from the state's retirees. So I raise this issue because not only of the potential impact on the city's balance sheet, but also on the state's. But the city needs to be thinking through, perhaps with the state, how best to address this issue. And in fact, the one-time contribution that the state just made this past year may be helpful in that regard, but still is not sufficient for adequately addressing the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. White. Maybe Judy, you'd like to respond to some of that. As I understand, first, former city attorney, Mr. Sullivan, would always say that any government has an unlimited ability to raise revenue because they have the complete and total control on force in the state. And I did hear something about maybe some bipartisan legislature out of the House to use marijuana or cannabis revenues towards the effort of paying down the deficit. So we'll watch that closely. As I understand it right now, the state is not contributing anything previous to the 7%, which was a one-time fee, or one-time, I guess, because there's been some federal money. But if the state went back to not funding our obligations under the retirement, would that be unaccounted for at the current moment? Or put it another way, do we expect, in preparing next year's budget, have we expected the state to continue that one-time 7%?
Right, at this point, there has been no discussion. I think there's been discussion, but there's nothing absolute about, for us to take into consideration any contributions from the state at all at this point. And Jane Farini may know a little bit more, staying on top of some of the new items that are on the table. Because I think it got tabled last year, and that's where they compromised and gave us the 7.5 as a one-time revenue. But at this point, I have no knowledge of any contribution, so.
I think we in the city of Portsmouth are much better at spending our money than the state of New Hampshire. So the $300 million surplus that they have through COVID relief, I hope that they can come to at least another one-year agreement as long as they have a surplus. But Mr. White, I would invite you to the legislative subcommittee meeting that I believe we're scheduling for either next Friday. This is probably one of the biggest topics that we handle there in terms of making sure that the state is aware that, over the last 14 years, their inability to pay, as was originally set out into the retirement fund, has cost the city of Portsmouth $26 million. So it's definitely something that we are heartily in support of the state meeting its end to the obligation when it comes to retirement funds. I would definitely welcome your thoughts, insights, and expertise when it comes to making our argument for the state to continue to do so stronger.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Councilor Blaylock.
I have one question for, if I may ask Judy a question about do we expect to get that award for the 27th year?
Yes, we do.
We already did.
Excellent.
We just submitted this ACFA report, and we do anticipate getting another award.
No, that's awesome. I'm just
Thank you.
so impressed with city manager and financial department, Judy, Andrew, for getting an award for this long. I mean, it's more than 2/3 of my lifetime. So, thank you.
And there's many changes, and there's been many changes along the way. So we have to adapt to those changes. We have to implement any new pronouncements in order to satisfy all the criteria of that award too. So.
All right. Councilor Lombardi.
Thank you, Mayor. I view this audit as a risk management exercise. I think basically that's what it is. And in reading through your reports, you found no substantial problems. But are there, in your opinion, are there unsubstantial issues that have the potential of growing? And I think perhaps like what Mr. White talked about, are there any other areas that have things that aren't really substantial, but have any chance of becoming a risk to the city?
If you look at the independent auditor's opinion, it does say that we provide reasonable but not absolute assurance that the financial statement is materially fairly stated. We go into more of the balances in accounts and funds than anything else in compliance or anticipated issues that, and the audit opinion does state there could always be other issues that would not be found by financial statement audit based on the nature of what it is. So any other risky areas for the future, obviously investments going down drastically and changing amounts drastically is a big one. For pension, I can't think of anything else. I mean, the city doesn't have that many investments on their own to worry about. So other than those going significantly lower than what they previously were, I mean, that's one area, but the city doesn't have that many investments. So I can't think of anything that's going to significantly be like a risky area in the near future.
And I think that's where our financial policies come into play to help prevent that for the future, especially when it comes to debt management and the policies that we have in place and the whole CIP process. You know, that's what we want to mitigate, is anything that would financially impact and put us in a negative balance, as we were in a negative fund balance, you know, probably 3 decades ago. So, you know, that's why we have become in a better financial position along the way, by implementing a lot of these policies that we have in hand. But unfortunately, there are some areas that are kind of out of our control, like the pension liability, the interest, you know, so we have to try and manage that along the way. Keeping a healthy fund balance helps in that we can deal with those unexpected situations as they arise.
Thank you.
If I may, Alina spoke about a couple of the upcoming GASB, or Governmental Accounting Standards Board, statements to keep an eye on. 96. She knows the numbers, I don't. But there's, later this calendar year, the standard setters will be voting on a final new standard, what is expected to be a new standard, that is anticipated to change the whole reporting model, not the whole reporting model, significantly alter the reporting model. Alina spoke about dual perspective financial statements. That will probably stay, but she further spoke about long-term accrual-based financial statements, short-term modified accrual. This is the one that's likely going to change. And you really have to keep, the city have to keep an eye on that, because it will require a lot of work on your behalf, is what it's going to require, quite honestly.
Thank you.
Councilor Bagley?
I had a
Oh,
question,
sorry,
but I was
Counselor.
thinking.
Lombardi, but did you have a question, Councilor Bagley?
I don't know if this is more an audit question or a budget question, but I'll just highlight, one of the things I think the city does really well is the 5-year rolling averages on things like health insurance, and, you know, so that we don't see spikes from year to year. This kind of hit home on a personal level. So this year, I work for a company based out of Massachusetts, and our health insurance went up 20%, the premiums, which is the cap in Massachusetts. So we typically don't see those huge jumps here in a city because we take that 5-year approach. So, 10-year approach. That's even better. So I just kind of wanted to acknowledge that you know, if you can smooth out those spikes, it makes it a lot easier for people to budget their personal finances.
Councilor Bagley? With that, we'll open it up to public comment. I want to thank Alina and Scott again for all the work they've done, and wish you the best when it comes to the merger. That's exciting news for you. Anyone from the public who would like to come to the podium, please just state your name and residence of Portsmouth first.
Good evening, Peter Huda, 280 South Street. My questions or my statements are not about the audit or the audit report. They're just something I'd like to call to the attention of the council. So I would like to call your attention to page 35 on the general fund highlights and the detail numbers. For the FY22 ending June 30, there was a surplus of revenues over expenditures of $6,629,200, which is the largest surplus ever, or at least in the last 10 years. As this was the final budget of the 2021 City Council, I'd like you to keep in mind that the budget for FY23 actually increased by $8 million. I'd also like to call to your attention the cumulative surplus over the last 10 years amounts to about $49,747,343, or pretty close to $50 million. The average surplus for the last 10 years is $4,974,734, or almost $5 million. So the expectation is that the citizens pay property tax in an amount to cover services provided by the municipality. The net effect of the fiscal year should be as close to 500,000 or $1 million as possible. The trend reports that were requested from the city manager at the last meeting from Councilor Tabor, as you begin to think about doing your next budget, should keep this in mind. There was a fact on page 36 here that I found very confusing, as this relates to what was requested from Councilor Tabor in a statement that was made. On the top of page 36, it says the positive variances in various departments were due primarily to the result of several vacancies. Now, this relates to what Councilor Tabor had asked, because Councilor Tabor made the statement that during COVID, we had laid off people, and now we were bringing them back in the next budget. The fact is, the city manager stood by her peeps. During the COVID budget session, the city manager did not let us lay off one person. And as I recall, we might have laid off part-time people, and then they were put right back. Then, in the next cycle, the budget came around, there were almost across the board promotions and increases to city staff. So that's why this statement is really confusing. I think the city manager did her best to keep and attract staff, even adding 27 positions here at this point in time. So I think the statement was a little upsetting to me, because I know how hard some people work to do this, and that statement just caught my eye. And the fact that there are several vacancies that are still there is no fault of the city administration. I think they did their best. That being said, with the number and amounts of the surpluses that we have going forward, there's something that keeps on happening here. So in the budget, when we prepared the budget, you put in the positions, the budget went through the standard process, it's okayed, and the property tax rate is set. It's based on hiring those new positions. If those positions are not filled, we have a surplus because your revenues still exceed the expenditures because you couldn't expend the money for those people. So what happens to that? It goes back into the general fund. Since those positions were not filled in the prior year, they come up again. And since the amounts that were a surplus that weren't spent because you couldn't hire those people go back into the general fund, the taxpayers do not see any benefit from that. So I would ask you, when you're looking at this for the next budget session and you look at these trends, to look at this and think about the side of the taxpayer who is getting taxed again on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. We'll have plenty of times to discuss and talk about the budget. This meeting is more for the audit, so if we could limit the comments to the audit, that would be helpful. I do want to point out things like the 2019-2020 budget where it didn't include the skate park, but that was something that we added after would change those numbers pretty significantly. It was just recorded. Just wanted to point that out. Any other comments?
Good evening, Esther Kennedy, 41 Pickering Ave. And in speaking just to the audit, I find it really hard to believe, as someone who's done a lot of audits in my personal career that are public audits, there were no findings. There were no findings in schools, there were no findings in police. You can have a finding if you just misappropriated one, or you changed one figure in a spreadsheet. You can have a finding. So the fact that we have a perfect audit and nothing's wrong, I find that really amazing. And I went back and looked today because that's what we've heard over and over years in this particular community, to see what other communities had. And pretty much everyone has some sort of finding. And it might be a simple little finding where someone forgot to document and put in a figure. But when you have this many people involved in something, not to have one simple finding, and it might not be something, just something that they would have to fix by the next year, or set up a new process or policy for the next year. State laws change. And school districts and other things don't necessarily always have the capability of keeping up. But an auditor comes and says, this year, you have to check all equipment under IDA grants that are $300, even though last year it might have been $150. And you don't know that. So you might have to have something you have to work on in your audit. And this happens across the state, in all municipal and schools and whatnot. So to say that we have a perfect audit, I find a little scary, because that means we're not being truthful in my mind. To say there were no findings whatsoever in every one of our programs, again, I know we have human people working on this, and no one is perfect. I know we get awards, but I also know that we pay into those organizations those awards are given. So I guess my concern has been, now in the past, and I've shared this before, that no one is perfect. And to say there are no findings of a city of this size, or nothing that someone put in the wrong line, I almost find that you're kind of not telling us the whole truth. And you're also not giving the Portsmouth people the truth on their findings, because no one's perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, former Councilor Kennedy. Would the members of Melanson like to respond? There was I guess, started off with glowing praise, but turned into a bit of an accusation that, somehow it was too good to be true?
I can clarify the financial statement audit. So as I mentioned in my presentation, there were no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies noted. That's what the management letter is for. There is no such thing as finding in a financial statement audit. This is not a compliance audit like a single audit, for example. So what happens in a financial statement audit is you have to follow the definition of material weakness or significant deficiency. That definition is disclosed in the management letter. So if you go back to the management letter, you'll see that it has to be something that's so pervasive that routinely is not getting corrected and fixed on time, and time goes by, so it makes it very difficult to go back and fix. So that's just a basic way for me to explain this. What you're mentioning is minor, like little things that we would have to be here all year, basically, to detect, and that's not what the financial statement audit is. So, for example, we did find, this is an example that happened this past fiscal year. There is census data that goes to the actuary. Now, census data is just something that somebody has to compile to send to the actuary so they can do their estimates, calculations for OPEB. It wasn't big enough for me to put on a slide because pension is much bigger for you than OPEB. So there were some inconsistencies with the school department, very minor for City of Osmona School. Now, that is not something that is a management letter issue because that would not materially affect that OPEB liability. So what would be in the management letter is to say that these census data issues were so pervasive that we think that this liability is materially affected. Now, that would be on a management letter. So hopefully that clarifies what a financial statement audit is and what goes on a financial statement audit management letter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to add that, as Alina pointed out when she walked through our opinion is that your financial statements are materially fairly presented. We never said perfect, materially fairly presented. That's what you hired us to do.
Thank you very much, Scott and Alina. Any other folks in the audience, public comment?
One on Zoom.
One on Zoom. Okay.
Robin Russo?
Hello, Robin Russo, 90 Fleet Street. So I have two questions. One to city management. How many employees do you have in your accounting department right now? I heard 13, I heard 19. Are either of those numbers correct?
Robin, this is public comment, so you can speak, but it's not a question and answer session. We'll have public dialogue.
Isn't that what we're here for?
No, this actually, at the end of the meetings, we take public comment. We will have public dialogue sessions around the budget where we'll have a more interactive approach, but this is to state any comments that you would like or questions that we can follow up with at a future date.
Well, that really doesn't do any good. I have some questions for Melanson on the preparation of these financial statements. Are they not allowed to speak to me and answer those questions? Allowed?
No,
to speak to me?
I get, the short answer is no. You're happy to share your questions. We can take it under advisement here and talk amongst the city council, but the goal of this is to hear from you, hear the questions that you have, note them.
Sure. Then I will make it in the form of a comment then, and you can respond to it. So my understanding is you have somewhere between 13 and 19 employees in your accounting department. And my understanding is that Melanson, in these financial statements, these annual financial statements, prepared all the footnotes in the whole on behalf of the city. My understanding is also you are using their fixed asset software. So they're maintaining the books for the fixed asset system, including CIP. I wanted to confirm that with them because I saw a document recently that came from their office when someone asked about the details of the CIP account. And also, I'd be interested to know if they're maintaining the bonds. Are they giving all the journal entries to our accounting team on a monthly, quarterly, annual basis? My question is, how much work is Melanson doing on behalf of the city of Portsmouth that the city of Portsmouth isn't doing themselves with their 13 to 19 accountants on staff? And why hasn't the city hired somebody eligible in government accounting to do this instead of having our outsourced CPA firm do it? Because we certainly have the money to pay someone with those qualifications. And so when I hear their presentation and they're talking about the great award the city of Portsmouth just got on this CAFR report, it's basically the CPA firm getting the award, not city employees. So we need to have better understanding, and you can give that to us any way you want, whether it's in a city council meeting or in an audit committee meeting, as to how much city employees / accountants are doing for this CAFR and how much the outsourced accounting firm is doing. They're essentially, are they auditing their own work, is my question. On the table, and you can get back to me later.
Thank you, Robin. We can probably get back to you right now. Judy, the finance department, it's much bigger than the accounting, but do you want to list the number of accountants that we have?
Well, I mean, we have, the accounting department is made up, we have accounts receivable, accounts payable, we have payroll. So their function is strictly that. We have myself and the deputy finance director, who is really responsible for all the bond issues, all the calculation of the bonds, issuing the bonds, tracking all of that, doing all the fixed assets. And, you know, I think there's a, from things that I've heard over the last several months, or actually over the last couple of years, is there really is a misrepresentation of what the accounting department does or what your finance department does. We not just hand over a trial balance, we maintain everything in-house. And it is specific in the RFP, and it's also specific in the RFP that just went out recently, that the non-attest services, which is really consolidating all of this information into the full accrual basis of accounting, is done by the auditors. They're not auditing their own numbers. This is the same procedure that will happen in next year's audit. So the auditors are not doing journal entries for us. We close our books fully. We very seldom have any closing entries that the auditors may have after we present the information to them. We prepare many of the statements. We do the budget to actual statements. We do all the debt service statements. I can't stress enough that we prepare the MD&A, and the auditors are there to audit. They come in and they do their sampling, they do their audit, and they do that non-attest service. Very few, and you can ask the auditors here, how many governmental entities in New England specifically that actually do their own non-attest services, and I believe there's one, and that is like Portland, Maine. Other than that, we can do them. We have the expertise. You have your professional accountants in the city of Portsmouth, and we can certainly add more staff, and we can certainly upgrade our financial software in order to do the non-attest services. So it's actually more cost-effective to have all of our information, everything that we do, all of our documentations, our tracking, it just goes on and on and on. And then we hand everything over to the auditors to do that only one piece, and that is not only the audit piece, but the consolidation for the government-wide financials. We do the water and sewer on a full accrual basis of accounting, We use the modified accrual basis of accounting for everything else, unlike what has been said that we do everything on a cash basis is specifically not true. So I think I
Thanks,
answered
Judy.
that.
The non-attest service, that was something that we did, it was a year ago, I believe, that we put an RFP out without that, but then later on, the audit
Right.
committee decided to include the non-attest service, and it was also included this year as well in the RFP, that the non-attest service, the audit committee, both the previous one and as is currently constructed, believes the non-attest service to be a important part of something that should be outsourced from the city of Portsmouth. Okay. Unless there's other folks on Zoom, I appreciate everybody coming out. We have another work session after this. I'm going to take a 5-minute recess, and we'll meet back here. Thank you so much, Portsmouth. Thanks, Judy.
That's not happening. At 7, I have not.
Here's an agenda.
I have to go home and walk Alec.
I have to go and do that.
Welcome back. I am incredibly impressed that we're only at 7:10 here, and we had a work session before on the audit, so setting expectations. We're really excited to have the discussion on the disposition, which is a fancy word for release of the Sherburne School. I'm going to pass over to the city manager, and we'll jump right in.
Thanks, Mayor. I, in turn, will turn it to my colleague Craig Welch, who's got some folks with him from his 2 boards, and Craig will run us through a presentation, and we'll take it from there. So, Craig?
Excellent. Thank you for the opportunity.
And just one, sorry, I forgot to do this. At the end of the presentation, the question and answers, we'll have public comment. We expected more maybe public comment for this one than the previous one, so we set this on the second portion, and you'll just come up to the microphone after the presentation and the council questions. Take it away.
Got it. All right. Thank you. My name is Craig Welch. For the past 10 years, I've been the executive director of the Portsmouth Housing Authority, and I have a couple board members up here with me. Tom Farini is the chair of the Portsmouth Housing Authority Board of Directors, and Adam Rudig is the president of PHA Housing Development Limited Board, and we work in partnership to both build and own and manage some 668 units in the city. The mayor appoints our board, so we have public oversight as well into the Portsmouth Housing Authority. And I know I have other commissioners here too, Kathy Kane and Kathy Bergeron, Michael Griffin, Cara Rodenheiser, Robin Pickering, and Kathy Kane, and Adam Rudig. So I got to make sure, these are my bosses, so I got to make sure I don't
Gotta get 'em right,
forget
man.
anyone, any single one of them. But I was, the mayor and I spoke several months ago, and he was really interested in the Sherburne School property, and I know one of his top issues is housing and workforce housing and trying to solve that huge challenge that we have. And I know all 9 of the councilors here agree. And made it a top issue of all of you. And, despite the fact that people do not say that nothing gets done on this issue in the city, I can, definitely say that the progress on solving this challenge has been much too slow. But if you'll go to the next slide, Karen, that I do want to stop and celebrate an enormous success for the city of Portsmouth. In June of 2022, we opened Ruth Lewin Griffin Place. It's been a fabulous success. We had over 500 people who expressed interest in living there. There's still 230 on the wait list there. We've recently been honored by the U.S. Green Building Council as the Building of the Year. It was the highest scoring LEED project in New Hampshire in 2022, and we're LEED Gold certified. We're really excited to have received now a $250,000 grant from the Federal Home Loan Bank of Boston to create an innovative workforce development program where we're going to be working with Great Bay Community College and others to provide some additional rent subsidy for the residents there who want to go back to school and improve their job prospects. So we're really excited about that. Thank you. Just because people are interested in this and who's living in workforce housing, we have 91 people that are living downtown now at 160 Court Street and 21 kids. And what an awesome place to be a kid. 7 city employees, 4 from the school department, 6 restaurants, 4 nonprofits, 4 hotels, 3 hair salons, 2 grocery stores, and 2 jewelry stores, and a lot of other businesses and important businesses in our economy have employees who are living now downtown. So tonight we're going to go through a presentation. I'll try to do it quickly because I know councilors have questions and comments and the members of the public. But somebody said, "Why are you saying this is Sherburne Academy when this is or Sherburne School when it's Lister Academy?" And I said, "Well, because Lister Academy is moving, and that's what it's been called, the Sherburne School." So we want to, and that's Mr. Lister there. I thought I'd give him a shout tonight for all he's done. But we're going to talk about the site attributes, not necessarily in this order, of the Sherburne School property, the building attributes of the building itself, some options for housing, some options for other community uses there, some sustainability goals, which we always want to talk about, 2022 housing market study that we published in this past year, and want to talk about a couple of the findings there. And also just a quick mention on the history of the partnership the Portsmouth Housing Authority has with the City of Portsmouth to do just this, and what kind of financial commitment that we're prepared to make to do something with the property. And also the timeline. What I'm going to lay out is an aggressive timeline to move a project forward there, and we're looking at some specific dates where there's deadlines in which we can get financing from through the low-income housing tax credit program, and I can explain a little bit of that later. But we do want to move it along, so and we think there's benefit to that. But at a few different junctions here as we go, you're going to be asked that question whether or not we want to slow down and have housing later or do it now, and we can talk about that too. First, the history of cooperation between the city and the PHA. The city actually created us. We're an independent special purpose government agency, but we were created by the city in 1953 and built 421 units in our first, early on with the public housing program. In 1996, we did our first adaptive reuse of a neighborhood school. So we've done this before. The Atlantic Heights School is now 30 units of senior housing, with lots of people on that wait list as well. We did the same thing with Cottage Hospital right behind you, which is now 20 units of senior housing. Saved that from demolition and was able to provide new housing in the city. Same thing with 2010 with the neighborhood Lafayette School, which is 10 units of senior housing. Now 2022 with Roos Place. We don't get any general funding from the city. Sometimes we get CDBG pass-through funds and some CIP funds that came for our last project. But we operate on federal subsidies and rents. And like I said before, we have local oversight. What I don't want to talk about today, except for a couple of the findings in the housing study, is the importance of workforce housing. I think we've established that it's important, and I think we've established that there's not enough of it. And so I just want to point out that this is a very well documented and long worked on a project, most recently with the Portsmouth Housing Market Study, but also in the recent EDC Business Retention Port, the 2025 Master Plan, the Blue Ribbon Commission that ended up with the housing policy that the city had out of that, our own strategic plan, another Blue Ribbon Commission, all these mention housing. So we've been talking about this for a long time. We're going to proceed with the common understanding that we need more of this. In fact, I had this in my one of the files in my office. So Portsmouth, who can afford it? That's the 1985 Portsmouth Magazine. And I can show you stuff that we've been having this conversation for a long, long time, and that's why we've got to ask now or never. First, this housing market study that we commissioned last year with RKG Associates. They used a lot of demographic data to make some findings here, and also, as Portsmouth usually does, shows up for a community survey. We had over 600 responses where we got some information from people in the city and outside of the city. Obviously, big priority area is workforce housing. Half of the demand by 2030 is going to be for households earning 80% or less of the area median income. And also evidenced by the fact we had 500 people that applied for our workforce housing downtown and are interested in that. So that demand is going to grow. A big part of the story is that people who are living in Portsmouth now are the ones that are hurting. The term cost burden refers to a condition where people are paying a very high percentage of their income on rent. In New Hampshire, 64% of the extremely low income in the state are rent burdened. And if you look at Portsmouth, under the 2,392, according to the study, Portsmouth households that are making under 50% of the area median income. Those are the folks that are at risk of housing security and the waterfall of negative consequences to families and to the community when that happens. And also our commuting workforce is also cost burdened too because of the rising cost of transportation. The idea that we're going to keep issuing housing permits for multifamily housing. And because we add a lot to the supply, that pricing, the rental prices are going to come down is a myth. There has been no corresponding decrease in rental costs in the city of Portsmouth, no matter how many housing units that we build. The case there is that the Portsmouth Housing Authority is a local nonprofit organization. We've capped rents on a 99-year affordability covenant. We're a nonprofit organization. We don't make money off of these. And really, working with the nonprofit housing community is the way to have permanently affordable housing in the city of Portsmouth. Seniors and accessibility. We didn't have people that were dying for age-restricted housing or senior-only housing. Some of that. We have some of that property now. But it was really about accessible housing. So a lot of those folks are seniors. That in the survey, current home does not meet their accessibility needs, but they don't want to leave the city to find suitable housing. We're an old housing stock here. Most of the owned housing stock was built before 1960, and the rental housing stock before 1980. There's huge benefits, again, to the community, not just to the culture of the community, but in terms of services and our public health, to have people aging in place and be and stay local. And I get calls all the time from people who are, can't walk upstairs and they're old New Englander and would really like an accessible and affordable place to live in one-story living. Strongest needs cited, workforce and moderate income housing, and then also housing for the low-income households, and also specialized and service-supported housing. The specialized and service-supported housing, if you look at the data, you may not see anything striking about that, but I consider that underreported. A lot of the specialized housing needs that we have and other communities have are for populations that are largely invisible, or often invisible to a lot of people. But I can tell you, after 20 years in the housing business and 10 years doing it here in Portsmouth, that there's some really significant needs for some different kind of housing that is not just housing, but comes with some kind of support for the residents that live there. For instance, people with physical disabilities, people with mental disabilities, people with developmental or serious intellectual disabilities, victims of domestic violence, the homeless, veterans, transitional housing. There's all kinds of housing needs that are not necessarily workforce housing. The demand is for workforce housing, and everybody believes we should build more, but I think having a conversation about other specialized housing and supportive services is important. What we're using the word village, because what we're envisioning for the city is a mixed use type of site that includes both housing and some other non-housing uses that may be have some synergy with the housing that could be on the site. Also some service-supported housing could be a part of it. Recreational uses, program space, open space, food. A lot of other things could be a part of what is developed and what is programmed out of the Sherburne School property. I think it's a moral imperative that we always talk about sustainability at every opportunity that we have. We did something special downtown, being LEED certified, and it's a super high performance building, an energy efficient building. But energy efficiency and clean energy is only a part of the sustainability goals that we have, including reduced inequalities and industry and innovation and infrastructure. So many of these touch on the work that we do, and we really have some aspirations to do a lot with on the energy front coming up, either with a passive house or a net zero type of development we're studying right now. The Sherburne School site. Sherburne School is a 5-acre site, just a tiny bit over a 5-acre site. 35 Sherburne Road. It's sort of a gateway to the Panaway neighborhood. It does have a softball field, a regulation softball field on the property. It's in a municipal zone. The property is owned by the city of Portsmouth, and it's operated currently by the Portsmouth School Department as Lister Academy. I think everybody here knows that Lister Academy is in the process of moving out to the community campus, which is the reason why you're talking about the disposition of the school. It's an interesting zone as a municipal zone because it abuts both office use, industrial use, and residential use. So it's a pretty unique piece of land and really an outstanding location. The blue is some residential neighborhoods. This is also walking distance from some really large employers that are right there, including Portsmouth Hospital and Highliner Foods and Liberty Mutual, Northeast Credit Union. It's also walkable. There's a pedestrian path and a bike path that goes right to the C&J terminal that goes direct to Boston and direct to New York. So as a commuter location, it's really great. And it's about as easy on and off the highway as you can get for property here. Those are some of the other uses. Like I said, it's really connected. I mean, there's even a existing bicycle infrastructure that lead from right here, down to where the new skate park is going to be in Plains Field. And it's really the closest housing to Pease and to all the large employers at Pease. So it's a great spot. I said there's on the site, it is a 5-acre site, but about 2.5 acres are really, we think, are viable for new development if the school stays where it is. There's more housing opportunity if the school, if we were able to use that footprint for new housing, but we think it's about a 2.5 acre for new development there. We hired an architect a week ago, and we hired a civil engineer today. So we're moving quickly, and we'll talk about that later. So this is just a first blush of something that could be possible out there. If we're talking about other community uses, maybe a mix of housing types between rental, multifamily, or townhomes, or some land for some additional construction of other community uses or other kinds of housing. You get, when you get density, you get more affordability, but there's a lot of factors that go into figuring out how many housing units and what kind of housing units will end up on this site. And so this is just a first example. We're in a housing crisis, so putting a lot of housing units when you have an opportunity to is the right thing to do, but there's some really serious financial constraints that come with the low-income housing tax credit program, and there's possibly a phased approach because of how that program works. So there's still a lot of open possibilities there. The building, the 17,000 square foot building that's currently operating as a school, although it's got very significant deferred maintenance. What we in fact, if you go to the next slide too, Karen, you can see that a lot of the trim and the windows are in really bad shape. It's got a pretty old heating system, HVAC system, and so it's a pretty weathered building, but it's a pretty cool building, built around 1930. There's a gym in there, and so there's the uses for the building. There's several classrooms at the end. What we believe about the building right now is that in order to do an adaptive reuse of that building and turn it into housing, the per square foot cost to do that for the 12 to 15 housing units that we think we could put in there may far exceed the total development costs that are allowed under the low-income housing tax credit program, which is just a long way to say it's really expensive to do this. And not that we haven't done it before. Both the Connors Cottage and Lafayette School were very expensive. It wouldn't have attracted private capital. Maybe it didn't make sense, but we pulled it off anyway. But we got to go into it with our eyes wide open about what that building could be for other uses, or whether or not it should be demolished. There's some opinions that it should be. So the opportunity is, I think, for a mixed-use type of village. I see, like I said, we have a housing crisis, and I see a lot of housing units. We want to have high aspirations and goals for sustainability. We're creating permanently affordable housing. There's a notion that somehow, someday, it's going to be sold and turn into, some market rate housing. That's a myth. That's not happening. This is permanently affordable housing owned by us. We have no other incentive to raise rents or sell it, other than our ability to operate it. So other community services, we're a local nonprofit developer, as I said, supporting a diverse economy and also an ability to get some more people aging in place who are moving out of their homes. Challenges, like I said, there's scarcity of funding sources for this kind of stuff, but we did pretty well downtown, figured it out. Speed to market, real estate markets change. There's a lot of reasons to wait. I don't think that the reasons to go slowly are often not good enough to balance the need to move it along. One reason why we're 20 to 30,000 units underbuilt in affordable housing in the state of New Hampshire is because this stuff takes so long. And it shouldn't take so long. And you've got land that the city owns that's an outstanding piece for development. Our goal would be to start on a process that's going to give the city a master plan and to move towards developing it now. The tax credits that we can use that could bring up to $15 million into the city of Portsmouth to invest in this kind of infrastructure, you're only able to apply for once a year, and that's in August. If we can have permits in August, then we can get something built and get something occupied in 2025. The clock is ticking for a lot of people in finding housing. That's meaningful that year, and real estate markets change and things change. So doing it now, I think, makes a lot of sense. There's a million ways something can push us into that 2024 round, and that would be okay, but I think we should approach this with some urgency. There's a high probability of phases, and there's some complexity when you start mixing uses, because you start mixing funding sources and procurement. That starts to get really complicated, how those cost allocations work, and how to design something cool on a really limited budget. But I think we did that downtown well. Capital sources, we can skip over that. There's a lot of them to pull something like this off, but the capital stack can include some of these things, which include both loans and from our organization, but the Federal Home Loan Bank, private banks, Bank Prop bought all the tax credits for this. State of New Hampshire Community Development tax credits we had. There were 31 businesses that stepped up to buy tax credits for this building and to invest in this building, which was terrific. City financial commitment, that's for you to decide later. I think if we're going to talk about other community uses and there's an appetite for continuing to use the gym or the school and renovate the school or provide CIP funding for some infrastructure later on. But this is a project that, the mayor asked me to study it, see if there was some housing out there, and we're doing that because we build housing, and there's no financial consideration from the city that's required unless you want to, and I will ask later, but it doesn't mean that there is. What we're doing is we're paying all the we will pay all the pre-development costs ourselves. We've already approved $150,000 to go towards this. This is not city money, taxpayer money. We've already hired architects, survey, civil engineer, environmental. Our total at-risk downtown in Ruth's Place was about $600,000. So that's what we're prepared to spend to get permits and get everything designed. It's complicated stuff. Now, the timeline, we're right now, based upon tonight, we'll enter into a master plan development process, which we're intending on finishing in February. If we can finish that in February, we'd like to present a master plan to the City Council at your March 6th meeting. And we'll ask you to refer it to the Planning Board for an advisory opinion after that. Soon after that, after the City Council gets it back and is going to make a decision about the disposition, then we'll enter into a land lease agreement sometime later this spring. We'll push for getting land use permits in hand. We can start, if we are awarded tax credits, we'll start construction of phase 1 at least in 2024 and be leasing up in 2025 and be on to our next one in 2026. You can blow through all those. I was just highlighting those people. So that's my my punchline, is that we can add housing. There's a lot of opportunity to add housing out on the Sherburne School site. We could get going on it right away. We do not need to have decisions about what happens to the school building in order to get started on a housing project. If the kids needed to stay there for a long time because that process was going slowly, that wouldn't make any difference. We've got plenty to do there, and could cordon that off and keep the kids safe while we're doing that.
Thank you, Craig. And thanks, Tom and Adam, for coming on. We'll have, I'm sure, some questions. I would just like to start with a comment. I think housing is it's one of the most visceral issues that we have. You're not wrong to point out in 1985, this was an issue. I think when my aunt was mayor, she was saying, running on a campaign that, neighborhoods are being destroyed by developers. So, it's not an uncommon theme when you live along the water to figure out where everybody's going to live. One of my proudest moments as mayor was when I was stopped by a kid that I grew up playing Little League with, works for the city, and told me I got in. And a lot of people tell you a lot when you're on the council, and so you kind of just smile and shake your head, all right, and you kind of tell that I didn't know where he got. He's like, I got into the Ruth Griffin place. So he's one of the 7 city employees that is there, and he was so incredibly proud to be able to call Portsmouth home, a place where he grew up, a place that he works for, that he wants to stay in. It's incumbent upon us to figure out ways to help the housing situation. A lot of folks think that we can require developers to do anything. The RSAs in the state simply do not allow us to do that. They don't say, hey, you can mandate 20%. You can say through a variance, through this, and we're going to close hopefully some of those loopholes here. But we can't say this apartment, or we're building this hotel, so this money goes towards our affordable housing fund, which we have, just not funded. It's not possible. So when we look at areas that we can help, one of those areas is working with the land that we own, with the partners that we have, with the nonprofits, specifically the one that we have oversight through the power of appointments over, and that's the PHA. So I'm really excited to work on this next project. I hope that we can bring an open mind to what workforce and below market rate housing is in Portsmouth. I think that one of the lessons learned through the Ruth Griffin place is that we gotta name this after somebody that everybody loves as soon as possible, because nobody's going against Ruth. So we got to figure out a name for this equally as impressive. But I'm hopeful that the questions that we have align on a mission and a speed of this that will get people, more people in housing than less, and that we can make sure that on our watch, Portsmouth is a little bit more affordable than we found it. So with those comments, Councilor Denton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Craig. This is extremely exciting. It's the first time the city's considered building a brick and mortar property or assisting with it, I think since 2016 when the Parrott Ave was briefly considered. And I'm wondering, On the timeline, one of the major things you had for the city council was the referral to the planning board. But beyond that, how else could we help?
Thank you for asking or offering? Well, there's a variety of ways. I mean, the housing policy that you passed in 2016 was pretty clear on a few things, and one of those things was to make the permitting process more streamlined and easy to do. That's hard. Soft costs are really expensive. This last time around, the city waived some permit fees to make it more possible. There was a small CIP contribution, your capital improvement plan contribution, to provide the access road and put some pedestrian park improvements that was helpful in improving the property. So there could be a variety of ways like that that we're exploring now that the city could further help, for sure, with ARPA money or CIP money or something like that.
Thank you.
Assistant Mayor.
Thank you.
Councilor
Your Honor. My first question would actually be directed towards the city manager, and that would be to highlight the timeline that the school department has suggested to remove students in the relocation of Lister.
Sure. Thank you for the question. In July of 2022, I was part of a group of staff that went to a school board meeting to seek their vote to declare that they would relocate the Lister Academy program to the community campus. And when they did that, with no date specific in the motion, they would declare the Sherburne School no longer necessary for educational purposes. So with that in mind, we can move forward. I think Craig's point is well taken, that even if the school needs to remain there for a period of time while we work out how to best relocate them, while they find the funds to fit out the space within the area we've identified in community campus, it sounds like the two uses can coexist or overlap, certainly.
Thank you. And thank you, Craig and the board. My next question, and again, these would be roundabout figures. Given your experience of the development in Ruth Griffin Place, obviously with the very preliminary designs, ideally, what is a number of units and or residents that that PHA is looking for guidance to, or giving guidance to your architects and engineers to try to fit into that space?
Yeah, we've got to make some decisions about that pretty quickly. Right now, we started with a pretty wide range and gave a charge to consider what we thought, based upon financial constraints and the land, was anywhere between, it's a big range, but anywhere between 80 and 160 units. So far, what we've found at the top of that range is that there's more pavement, there's more parking that's required, where it starts to get, we really want to aspire to have some open space and some recreational opportunities. The easiest thing to do under the low-income housing tax credit program is to do two phases of 40 units each. But I think, I think we leave something on the table by doing only that number of units. So we're in that kind of range, and it depends what, how much land we're able to do. I mean, obviously, a 17,000 square foot footprint takes up a lot of land that could be used for, a whole nother 40 units. So depends on how you look at it, but that's what the master plan will.
Thank you. And then another question. We hear a lot of micro units and smaller units as a potential to solve some of our housing crisis. It read to me in the housing study that we actually need larger units. We're looking at 2 to 3 bedroom units and that need. Do you see that need being filled here?
Well, we looked at the private market too, because they know a little something and built mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms here in Portsmouth, and so we have some risk to manage as well. But as you say, that the housing study does say that Portsmouth household size is actually growing a little bit, and that the larger 3-bedroom units would be good to build some larger 3-bedroom units. So we would definitely anticipate at least some of the units being three-bedroom units. We went up to York, Maine has a small housing authority. They just opened a building with some three-bedroom units, and they say they went first. And I think West End Yards, a different product, but said the same thing. So yes, we think a mix of sizes, but yes, some three bedrooms.
Thank you.
Councilor Bullock, then Councilor Lombardi.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Craig, and thank you, Tom and Adam, for your presentation, all your work done so far. So I'm on the Historic District Commission, I'm on the Rec Board, I'm also on the Land Use Committee, so I have a lot of different interests here. I know we talked about saving the building, we talked about the other, as mentioned, raising the building. I don't know if we've looked at the costs of that. I think saving the building would be great. That was one of my questions. I know you mentioned open space. I was glad you touched on how many units PHA was looking at. So my other concern would be like the softball field, if that was occupied by a new building. Have we reached out to the youth softball that uses that, or how much open space would there be if that was taken up? I think, yeah, those will choose those.
Yeah, the softball, the rec study, I don't know exactly what you call it, the recreational needs study, is going to say when it's fully complete that based upon other communities of similar size that we should have 4 softball fields in the city of Portsmouth. The youth softball and Portsmouth Rec Department tell me that there's 3 that are using. This would make it 2. We'd of course be very supportive, and I know the softball folks that I've spoken with would love to have a field, or more fields to play on, and something to replace this field if it goes. But yeah, it is used for youth softball. It's not used for adult leagues, but it is used in the spring and summer.
I have another question. Obviously, you have to look at all options. And I guess just to clarify for the people watching at home, people that live in this neighborhood, if they're anyone concerned about having any negative impacts on the neighborhood, for instance, the amount of cars, amount of traffic, or just having housing that's more affordable than theirs, they would worry that the value of their homes, might go down. If you could touch on that.
Yeah, no, I remember folks had said downtown that it wasn't a good place because there would be a high concentration of low-income people in one place. And I thought, I don't think that's our problem in Portsmouth. I think we have a high concentration of high-income people, and we don't really have a problem with a high concentration of low-income people. But I think what we're finding, and you meet the residents at Ruth's Place, then you'll quickly understand who we're housing here, and that I would hope that it's as a gateway to the community. It would be great for the neighborhood, whatever we build there, and it would be additive. Traffic impact, there are some neighbors there, but from a real estate location standpoint, it has almost less traffic impact than I've ever seen on a site. I mean, it's right off of a major highway. So I wouldn't think that would be, people worry about traffic, but I don't see that that's an impediment at all. It's on a major interstate highway, even density. I know we can't do it, but if you're in or that it's extremely unlikely, but if you're in a housing crisis, then why not go up high? I think what we're going to end up with is, because of cost, is a 4-story building. But if you're in a housing crisis, why wouldn't you go up 10 stories? And if you're going to go up 10 stories, why wouldn't you do it here? But we want to do something that fits into the neighborhood. Obviously, there's a fish stick plant and a office condo that are there as well. So it's not necessarily something where you're going to try to fit something into a neighborhood that has those kind of mix of uses.
And just one last question. As far as in the current building, if we were to preserve the building, what uses inside the building? Would they be micro units? Would they be saving the gym for like recreational use for the neighborhood? Or just, I don't know what all the options the PHA was looking at for in the building.
Yeah, I mean, I got 4 kids and athletes, and I hate for we need indoor recreational space for sure. The question is, who's going to pay for that? Does the city want to renovate the school in order to provide that, or is doing that at the community campus a bigger priority? That's what I don't know. But I love having indoor recreational space. That was a courtyard. That gym was a courtyard before that, and you could see some benefit if you were going to build housing around it, sort of a U-shaped original building. There could be some benefit to the gym actually coming down. But there's some uses for a structure like that. We just don't know right now enough to understand what it would take to really renovate the building up to current code. But I do like to remind people it is an operating building right now. It's not condemned. It is operating, but it does need some work.
Thank you.
I think, I'll get to Councilor Lombardi, but I think it's worth repeating that the presentation that we saw tonight is behind the building. I think some of our longer conversations around this are what's going to happen in the building itself. And then with regard to the softball field, looking forward to that rec needs study, but I think it's going to be correct around 4. This could serve as an impetus, and where the city might be expending funds. Again, I'm one of 9, but it might be in terms of accelerating the path to the second turf field out at community campus, and including an opportunity for softball there to line it for softball and things of that nature. But I think that our goal tonight and in the weeks to come is to decide whether or not behind the building is appropriate for housing, and if it is, to move forward with that, knowing that the building and the use of the building will likely have much more conversations with your neighborhood, Rich, but Panaway in general, and understanding what we need there to make sure that this feels connected to the rest of our community. And at the end of the day, people aren't worrying about housing values, but instead thinking about this is a additive to my experience living in Portsmouth. Councilor Lombardi.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple, an observation in our previous work session on the audit. There's indication of the largest population in Portsmouth is that of millennials, and those are people who are having children, and so it seems to me that that is perhaps at least part of the reason to move to some of the larger units in this location as well. And then the question I have is about the infrastructure to the site, and has there been any analysis of that as of yet? My guess is that it needs work, and maybe that's a way in which the city, through its CIP and plan for basic infrastructure work throughout the city, could contribute.
We were actually at Public Works today for a sort of an informal meeting to look at the GIS stuff and talk to the folks there who know about infrastructure. There's actually on schedule for this summer to replace sidewalks out in that particular area, so it's going to be a little work done there as well. So that'll be a part of it, but all that, it is serviced by water and sewer, and to extend that, like, it'd be nice to have 2 curb cuts in and out of the property, and so there'll be a little development there that kind of infrastructure help would be really helpful for us to do something. There's not a lot of capital sources for like energy efficiency and that kind of stuff, so we'd like to be ambitious on one side, but we've got to find other capital sources to do it. So anything that the city like that does is really helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Lombardi. Councilor Bagley, and then I saw Councilor Morrow. And then Councilor Cook.
Thank you, Your Honor. I've got a couple of questions. The first is In this location, there will not be sound barriers erected. However, it is right next to the highway, and with the population density that we're talking about, they would have qualified for sound barriers. However, the way the law is written, future projects don't qualify, so to speak, like that window has been closed, it won't be grandfathered in. How do we mitigate the noise level being so close to the highway?
Yeah, we've looked at the sound quite a lot so far, although it tells you a little bit about something at the building, because the sound next to the highway, when we measured it, was actually not as loud as the sound inside the gym with that HVAC system going. But it is, we think we can solve the problem with a berm and maybe, and the positioning of a building there. I think the best way to deal with the sound is to use a building for it. There's no trees that are going to come down. Most of the vegetation is within the state buffer, but so far with the civils and stuff we've talked to, we think we can do a lot of mitigation with some site work.
And then my second question is, while I appreciate your aggressive timeline, I am concerned that we may not have consensus yet in the community that this is the highest and best use. There are a number of nonprofits in the community that may have other options that they would present to the city for use of the land, or there may be other options to use the land other than affordable housing. So while I wouldn't want to delay the project, at the same time, I wouldn't want to move so quickly that we didn't give the city a chance to digest what options are on the table. And even if we do go forward with a PHA project, it sounds like there's multiple layers. You know, do we keep the Sherburne School, or do we raise it and put in different layouts? And there may be multiple proposals just from PHA. So understanding the speed at which government works and looking at your timeline, I guess I have concerns. I don't know if we can overcome them or not, but I just want to put that out there.
I appreciate your concern, Counselor. I think it's a valid and well-founded one. And it is an ambitious timeline. It's a very simple equation. If we don't make tax credit application by August, then it's 2026. If we don't make it by August the year after, it's 2027. And certainly all of these other needs are things that we would entertain and participate in as best we could in a way that would facilitate the city's needs. Our mission, however, is a fairly narrow one. We get tax credits for what we can build under federal law. And so I do think it is ambitious, and I do appreciate the concern, but I would also say, I guess it's a question of the city weighing the goal of workforce housing sooner than later and continuing to study it.
Great, thank you.
And again, on that point, the building itself is where I think some of the focus and questions around what other uses could that building be. By no means is that decided, and did we get any input from the neighborhood on that. But I think that the idea that when we've looked at areas and city-owned land where we can make a difference when it comes to affordable units, this is, according to the PHA, the best place for housing in city-owned land that we currently possess. Could own more, community campus, a lot of acres out there, but in terms of traffic and general location, this seems to be the best, as according to our partners of the PHA. I wouldn't want our, but again, 1 in 9, I wouldn't want our effort to make the decision with the school itself, the building itself, and that parcel contingent upon what we can do behind that. That seems like, would love to have already started on the next Ruth Griffin Place. And years come quick. I'm reminded by that with my 6-year-old. She's going to be In 2025, she'll be an 8-year-old. You know, if it's 2026, 9-year-old. You know, pretty soon we're talking about her moving out of our house, and you know, I very much want her to have that opportunity and to be able to stay in Portsmouth.
We have met
And
with,
Councilor Cook, and then Councilor Moreau.
Thank you, Your Honor, and thank you so much for your presentation today. I really appreciate it. One of the things that you talked about was this being kind of a mixed-use development, and you mentioned some things that might work, especially when we're talking about services for some of the individuals that need housing in the city. What do you envision around that? Have you had any thoughts around things other than housing that you would also co-locate here?
Yeah, we've met with other nonprofits. I mean, there's other nonprofits that have been looking for land in the city for a long time to do a variety of things. So I had been thinking about, you know, starting on housing, and then if there were alternative uses, that is a phase 2. And when we were meeting with Kathy from Haven and Ann from Gather, they both said, we don't want to be a phase 2. We want to be a phase 1. We're ready to go and do a project like this. You know, in both of those organizations, I spoke with Seacoast Community School. We have a satellite location for Seacoast Community School at Gosling Meadows, which has been really successful. Again, there's staff shortages, so we're not growing child care centers, but there's plenty of demand for that. It would make a part of the building or all the building could make a good use of that. But yeah, I think there's a variety of things if we're thoughtful about food, about services, about kids, about all kinds of things that we could do. There's such strong needs everywhere.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Moreau.
Thank you guys so much for the presentation. I know that Craig and I have been talking for a long time about this property and about other things going on. Last night, the Rockingham Planning Commission actually came out with their needs study for our area. And I thought it was kind of bad news because we've heard the 20,000 units on the statewide. Well, it's over 14,000 for the Rockingham alone. So that's exactly.
Okay.
Rockingham,
Yeah.
the Rockingham Planning Commission communities is, it's almost 14,500 units. So we're really short in this area. So I say housing now, but I do think we need to be thoughtful and make sure. And I appreciate the questions about the sound barriers. I do think that we have to be thoughtful of how we do that, because those are lots of money, and you don't want to put people there and then just have them be upset because it's so loud. But there are techniques also. Cost more money, but techniques to the construction that can be done in order to do that. I love the idea of the village and the different services, and looking at maybe we take more time with the building itself and have more options out there to talk about the building itself. But I think we really need to think long and hard about the land and really getting another Ruth Lewin Griffin Place started as soon as possible, even if it has to be in 2 phases. I'd like to see, could you do 60 units per building? I get there's all the tax credits and all of those. So my personal preference is to move forward with at least some of this as quickly as we can, and then maybe take some time on some of the other pieces and really be thoughtful about what that building conversion could be, because maybe it would be best just to get rid of the building. But having chaired the demolition review committee for quite some time, whenever a building is going to get torn down, people in the city get very huffy about it. So I think that we would, I have to look at, repurposing it, look at the cost analysis for that, and then also look at the cost analysis for tearing it down and building it new. So I think we really need to take a look at both of those and see what works best for the city as a whole. Sorry, it was less questions and more comments.
Thanks, Councilor Moreau. We do have the audience here, so I want to get to the public Q&A. We can, again, have some questions at the end of that, but we'll open it up to public comment. We'll go through folks here that are in person, and then we'll go through Zoom if there's any. Just your name and... actually, we'll go with Nancy Kleber first. The chair of the school board.
Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay. I'm Nancy Noveline Clayberg. I live at 405 FW Hartford Drive, in Portsmouth, and I have the honor and pleasure of being the chair of the Portsmouth School Board. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank the City Council for once again collaborating with our school department. I talked to you all just before Christmas when we had the shooter hoax at our high school, and the collaboration and the cooperation with our police department was magnificent, absolutely magnificent. And I know that, as I mentioned then, other communities don't have that kind of partnership with their various city departments. So I just want to reach out to the City Council and once again say thank you for helping the school department. As you know, our alternative high school has been at the Sherburne School for many years now. Before that, it was a wonderful neighborhood elementary school when Portsmouth had 11 elementary schools at that time. And then we narrowed it down to 3 elementary schools, which is what we have today. But the Lister Academy has been a fabulous, fabulous program for students that are not successful in the high school. And a great example is a few months ago, I had my chimneys cleaned, and a couple of young men came into my house, and one of them said, I graduated from the Lister Academy. And he said, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that program. He said, I was not successful at the high school. I was able to make a success of myself at the alternative high school. And he said, I've had this great job that I love. So my heart just went boom when he said that. It was just such a wonderful thing to hear. So we're very excited about moving to the community campus. Again, the city, we sat down with the city came up with this idea. So our students will be in we're not a brand new, but a newly renovated space in a beautiful building with grounds that we can utilize. We have a maple syrup little business going on at the academy. We have outdoor gardens and all that kind of thing. So we'll be able to do that at the community campus. And I also want to thank the City Council for putting some funding in there in the CIP so that the renovations can take place. So that vote comes up when you vote on the CIP, and we're very thankful that the city is willing to work with us in funding this renovation. So once again, my experience being involved in the city is one of collaboration, cooperation. What can we do to help each other out? It's just been a wonderful, wonderful experience. And to think that we're acquiring affordable housing for many of our residents that can't afford to live in our city anymore. So it's just a great project. And I just want to say thank you to everyone involved.
Thank you, Nancy, and it is a pleasure to collaborate with the school board. We wouldn't be having this conversation if you didn't have your vote to make this a possibility, and we're looking forward to making the improvements to the Robert Lister Academy to make sure that those kids have what they need to continue to be successful. And that's a real shining spot of what we've done here in the city. So thank you for all your work that you've led on that, and appreciate the collaboration as always with our school board.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry, I took that Zoomer out of order. Just come up to the mic. I see Eric raising his hand. All right. If you want to go sit behind over there, you can get next. But we'll be here to listen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. My name is Eric Anderson, 38 Georges Terrace in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Thank you for the presentation. I came into this meeting tonight with a wide open mind about what the possibilities would be, could be, might be, and I appreciated Mr. Welser's presentation. I've taken notes, and I've been a resident of Hanover Manor for over 40 years. My wife has been there her whole life. My wife's family has been there for their whole life, which is better part of 60 years. So the neighborhood that is presently there is an important component of this discussion. If I was to describe Panaway Manor, Holly Lane, that whole area of the city, I'd put my hand up. And here's the city, and here's this component, here's this neighborhood. that it is a very unique and cooperative neighborhood. So I'm just approaching this subject with the cautions that I hope you have, as with the oversight of the whole city council in the discussion. I would wish that at some particular point, and I wish Councilor Blaylock would have brought this forward, but I think you've got to take this to the neighborhood. You have to have a more focused discussion in the neighborhood about what this project is, what it means, and what would be compatible with the neighborhood as it presently exists. I would not want to see something as opportunity, with this much opportunity turn into something that is not compatible with the neighborhood. Because the possibilities has been described by Mr. Welsh. There's a variety of categories that this type of housing could involve, from senior housing to low-income housing to workforce housing, to other aspects of nonprofits that you've just described, and the complexity of what this property could mean. But how compatible is it with a neighborhood that's been there for a long, long time? And I think if you would disrupt, if this whole project turns into something that's disruptive to that community or that neighborhood, I don't think that you have the full value and the opportunity that you have with this discussion to really bring it to full effect. So I hope you caution. Naturally, again, you as a city council have the complete oversight of this. But I hope you would take this to the neighborhood. The neighborhood is not, I'm glad to see that there's people, that hopefully are going to comment on this. This is not a full representation of the neighborhood that's there. And I hope that you could take it into that community with some type of notice and focused discussion on what is aggressively to be developed here, because I think you've stated that you want to take the most aggressive path to some conclusion, but do it with full sight and full knowledge and full respect of who the neighborhood and the community is there right now. And that'll be it. And I'll monitor this as it goes along, as I hope the rest of the neighborhood does, and I hope with some effort from the city that they'll solicit that type of discussion from the full neighborhood to the best of the possibilities. You can't send a bus to everybody's house and pick them up to take them to a meeting, but those that have an interest in it, I think, will show up, because I think this discussion is at its preliminary stages, and with the aggressive path that you're going to take, I hope you explore every possibility for full dialogue on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I'd point out that Councilor Blaylock suggested that we had this meeting at the actual Sherburne School, but the ability to live stream this as well prevented us from doing it there. I think that once this presentation is out, folks can digest, certainly reach out to us. I think it would make sense to have a neighborhood meeting on this. Again, the timeline is because we're in a affordability crisis in Portsmouth. It's what I'd say most people have stated as the number one goal is they have to move out, senior housing, things of that nature. But having a conversation in the still functional, not condemned building with a giant gym would be something that I think that would be a priority for us before we moved forward officially with any recommendation to the planning board.
Which one do I use? This one? No, this one. Good evening, everybody. I'm Kathy Beebe. I'm actually here wearing two hats. I am the executive director of Haven, the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Agency, but I'm also a resident of Portsmouth, and I think that that's really important as we have this conversation. First, I want to say how excited, as a resident of Portsmouth and as the director of Haven, I am at the concept of moving forward with additional housing that is much needed for the city of Portsmouth. I think that it's incredibly important, and we fully support that happening. What I'm here speaking to during the public comment session is the opportunity that also exists for the additional part of the property that's now owned by the city, which includes what we've been talking about, what happens with the building part where the Sherburne School now sits, and what is some of the opportunity that exists there. Many of you know, but I will just say briefly, that Haven is the largest domestic violence and sexual assault support and prevention agency here in New Hampshire. We've been located in Portsmouth. We began in Portsmouth as two small agencies, and we've been providing services that are critical to Portsmouth for over 45 years. As the largest provider of 13 agencies that are a network of the State Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, we are seen as a leader in the state and known for implementing best practices and innovative ways to respond to the evolving and increasing needs of survivors of domestic and sexual violence. We have a vision to create a community that is empowered, educated, and equipped to break the cycle of violence. We do this through providing a 24-hour support hotline and programs, and we are available around the clock every single day to support anyone impacted by violence and abuse. Our mission is also dedicated to preventing this and keeping our communities safe and free from abuse. Haven's prevention education programs have been in the schools for over 30 years. We've been in every single elementary school here in Portsmouth, middle school and high school, seeing thousands of kids with our important messages of personal body safety, healthy relationships, and how to get help if you are being victimized. We know that domestic violence is a leading cause of homelessness, which is why we are on the forefront of trying to address this housing crisis that we have here in Portsmouth and beyond. Haven is very committed to growing both our transitional shelter and our housing programs that are critical to helping individuals to secure permanent housing. For years, Haven has operated a very small shelter here in Portsmouth that has not met the needs of the residents of this community and beyond. To address this, we know that we need to build a bigger shelter that's transitional, that allows people to be ready and able to move into permanent housing. When we were looking at best practice, we traveled around the country. We went out west. We looked at opportunities of what's existed, what's innovative, what makes sense for here in Portsmouth, and we came up with what does make sense. But we need to find the location to do that, and we've been looking for several years to be able to find that location. We haven't been able to find it, but we know that it's the right thing to do. So right now what we're doing is leasing a 6-unit apartment building in a different county, because we could find that location, in order to start the process of finding dignified transitional opportunities for people that need a place to go as they heal from abuse and finding their way to permanent housing. This model is innovative, but it's also successful, and it would be the first of its kind here in New Hampshire, and it really should happen here in Portsmouth. It provides a dignified way for people to have the respite from their abuse, to access services, to be co-located with an office that provides programming and assistance, and allows them to have the assistance that they need while accessing support in order to be successful candidates to find safe and permanent housing. We collaborate with many communities and many agencies in the area, and one in particular is Gather, and Gather the Food Pantry. We've had successful collaborations during COVID, helping to feed some of our folks that are in both shelter and housing. We have a great synergy in terms of opportunity for us to provide an opportunity for co-located space and programming and shared space and services that would really revitalize and help those that we're trying to assist. The Sherburne School offers an opportunity for a win-win-win here. It's a win-win-win for Haven, it's a win-win-win for Gather, it's a win-win-win for Portsmouth Housing Authority, and for creating a thriving neighborhood and community that would really meet the needs of people that need housing and need additional support or assistance, as well as the greater community of Portsmouth at large. It's also a chance for you to demonstrate your commitment to keeping important nonprofit services right here in Portsmouth. Both Gather and Haven have been around for a really long time, and we really do need to stay here in Portsmouth and make this something that's available and accessible to those in need. It's also a great opportunity because our agencies are in a position to be able to raise the funds needed to revitalize and create the community and the building and the services that are needed for this. And it's something where we just were awarded $2 million in congressionally directed spending to start this process, and something that we know we can raise the additional funds needed to create what's needed to have a safe and opportunity for those leaving abusive relationships to have the opportunity to find housing and not be homeless. I'll take off my Haven hat and just say that, again, as a Portsmouth resident, this really is a win-win-win. I hope you will consider it. I hope you will think about it. It's an opportunity for you to show that Portsmouth is first in creating a thriving neighborhood, an equitable neighborhood, and something that is much needed here, right here in Portsmouth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Any other speakers?
Hi there. I'm Devin Quinn. I'm a resident of Portsmouth. I live on Gate Street. Big supporter of increasing housing. To live in Portsmouth is to know that we need more housing, and very supportive of this. I'm also a volunteer with Haven, and so I wanted to echo some of the things that I see as a volunteer. I volunteer on the Haven hotline, and so this is an opportunity that Kathy mentioned that seems like a real win-win. When I volunteer on the hotline, the staff goes home at 5, and then I take a hotline shift from 5 p.m. to 7 a.m. And, I talk to people. Sometimes I don't get any calls. Sometimes I get 6 calls in the middle of the night. And sometimes I talk to people from all over the catchment area. Talk to people in Portsmouth, people who have been here for a couple of years or for their entire lives, all backgrounds, all ages, faiths. They talk to me about what's going on. Sometimes it's an emergency. I'm talking to them with a police officer or at the hospital. Sometimes they're talking to me about something that happened a really long time ago, and sometimes they're planning their next move, and they're building that confidence and bravery to move on. And so always that is housing. I would say 80-90% of conversations I have is about housing. So when I hear more housing, I think that's another chance for people I talk to have an opportunity to move on. And I think that having a co-located opportunity with housing and with Haven would really serve a lot of needs of people who are living in this future housing complex. Maybe they or housing development. Maybe they will come and seek out one of the services or yoga classes or support groups, and those people who are leaving abusive relationships, it doesn't usually line up with an apartment opening that day that they're ready to leave. And so having that Haven model there could really facilitate that, because I just feel, to me, housing is absolutely domestic violence. People who are struggling through domestic violence, housing is a big need. And they're also part of our workforce. Workforce isn't just people who go to work. They're people who also have dynamic lives, and domestic violence is sometimes part of that too. So, we have this big opportunity to find a place and to do this, and I hope that it is considered in this spot, and if not, somewhere else in the city, because as a Portsmouth resident, I really want to see Haven stay in Portsmouth and keep serving our community.
Thanks, Devin.
Thanks.
My name is Manuel Garganta. I live at 471 Colonial Drive, Panaway. I've lived there for 55 years, so I'm still new. I appreciate the presentation that Craig and Tom gave. It's a very, the timeline is rather quick, and I understand
trying to go for the government to get money, which is going to be difficult with what's going on in Washington now. They could be cutting as we speak with the budget and stuff. I want to be careful what we bring in to Sherburne. I have an affection for Sherburne. All my 3 boys went through there. My wife went through there. Her sister went through there, and her brother went through there. So you can see it was built in 1940, so it's an old building. So I don't know what you have planned. I had a hard time looking at the schematic of what you had planned for the property. I saw and the elevations and stuff. I don't know how far you are. But Mr. Councilman Blaylock lives across the street, and I'm worried about what's going to come in there as far as traffic. We do need housing in Portsmouth. I totally agree. What type of housing do we need to have these people stay so they're not moving out of town far away? We have towns around us. Does anybody from the other towns want to do this type of building with your help? We have Newington, which probably never see that in there. We have Stroud. We have a lot of other communities. Dover's the only one I think that's starting to do something with that now. So I think we should take our time. I don't know how fast you need it, and I appreciate seeing a timeline for somebody that wants to develop in Portsmouth. That timeline was great, you know, regardless of what happens in that timeline. I don't know how long it's going to take to get this money that we need. But please, let's be careful what we put in there. We do need the housing for these people to work. You know, if I worked in Portsmouth and I had to go to Dover to live, you know, that's not easy. You know, we should be able to have the affordable housing, some type of workforce housing, or whatever you want to call it. But these people have to stay in Portsmouth. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Manny.
Esther Kennedy, 41 Pickering Ave, and I just really have a couple questions. I actually did work at that building at one point as an educator, and I'm perceiving that what we're talking about, if we're going to save the building, that we're building down in the lower area. And if that is true, especially when you're talking about 4 stories, if that is true, then I guess my question is, knowing what we know and looking at our research about the sewage treatment plant and the dumping of items, my question is when is the environmental study going to take place in this process? Given I know teaching there, the highway was always quite interesting to deal with. And so with all that, I know we were worried about that back in 1992 when I was working there. So I guess my question is, if we're going to rush it, when are all these studies taking place? Because I know they take time. And I didn't see that in the plan. And I would want to know that. I heard tonight that there's some parking studies. I remember even coming out of there with a small number of kids. It could be kind of interesting at the right time to get out there with people trying to get to Panaway. So I think those things need to really be looked at in order for the neighborhood to accept the proposal. So those would be the 2 big things that I would question right up front. I like the idea of saving the building personally because it's sentimental, but I also think that the land around it might be in question for environmental purposes. And lastly, as a council, we know our sewage treatment plants are still having difficulties. Where does all the infrastructure fit for adding projects like this, adding hotels, adding living? How are we going to take care of that? And that's a big, huge question. I think it needs to be inclusive of any new project that we build. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther.
If I may, Mayor, the Phase 1 environmental study is already complete.
Hi, Paige Trace, 27 Hancock Street. I don't live in Panaway Manor. I've been there several times, and it's always like everyone else for running for city council or going out to see people. There were a whole group of us at one point for sound barriers. I guess my concern, we need housing. And Mr. Walsh, your proposal was really well done. Thank you. But we have a neighborhood of 120 households out there, and they are a neighborhood. That's what you're hearing. These are well-established families and gentlemen, just like Councilor Blaylock. They live in that neighborhood.
Councilor Blaylock lives in that.
Yes, that's what I just said. Let them be a neighborhood. So all I'm saying to you tonight is if you're going to double the size or come close to doubling the size of the number of households, then maybe we ought to look equally as important in some fast, swift manner about sewage. Can it go out to Pease instead of all the way to Pierce Island? We're pretty close there. Is there a back door to sending the sewage that way? Is that something that's possible? Most important is keeping Panaway Manor the neighborhood that it is. So can you find another egress to this development? You've got one road in and out of Panaway Manor for all these people every day. They never say anything. They're still waiting for the damn sound barriers. And it seems that we need to pay as much attention to the people living there as the people who need to live there. And that's all I'm going to say. And I think it's wonderful that you're all trying to address it. And I think that you're having questions about it instead of just pushing it through, because there are plenty of opportunities. But these gentlemen out here are willing to give you a shot. And they're giving you less hassle than some of us did at one point with Court Street. And we all know we need housing. So let's try and keep it a neighborhood, and let them live their neighborhood too. Thank you.
Yes and no?
Good evening. My name's Lori Waltz. I live at 1001 Islington Street. I come with so many different hats on. I'm thrilled to see this opportunity coming forward. Craig, thank you so much for the work you did on that presentation. Being a member of the COVID Relief Task Force, really long task force name, never get it right. We've been talking about the need for more housing and what that's going to mean to Portsmouth. So many issues that are existing within the community right now come back to not having enough housing. It impacts our workforce. It impacts the community. It impacts people being able to stay in this community. I don't think it has to be either Panaway Manor or affordable housing. It can be a both and. Communities are doing this across the state, across the country. There is some really, really good literature on the Workforce Housing Coalition's website that talks about busting myths about what you think workforce housing is and what you think it's going to bring to the community. There are two ways to get into that space. You can come from Route 1 by the hospital and go past the fish stick plant, or you can come in from 33. I think it's an ideal piece of property that does not exist in Portsmouth, and I would hate to see this all go to waste. But I have a couple of questions. I've been a volunteer, did crisis line work like Devin explained. I served on the board of Haven. I worked at Haven. I served with Councilor Moreau as the board chair of Haven, so I have a real affinity for that organization. And like Kathy said, I think this is a real win-win-win opportunity to bring in other nonprofits that provide services. Their clients also need housing. And I'm sure that there are people with the bubbles over their head saying, oh my gosh, we can't have domestic violence clients in our neighborhood. I would invite you to make a phone call, set up an appointment with anyone that works at Haven, and they can confidently tell you that what you're thinking of that Lifetime movie or something that you recently saw on Netflix that painted a really terrible, scary picture is not reality. And I'd be happy to sit down with you and explain to you what that actually looks like. Craig, you mentioned the opportunity to get tax credits and that that's a need, an urgent need. If you were to include in phase one other services such as Haven or Gather or a number of other nonprofit services, would seeking the tax credits prohibit you collaborating with other organizations in that phase one? You're nodding yes, it would, or you're just
No,
nodding you heard
no.
me? Okay.
Oh, could you ask it again?
Yes.
Hey, so Lori, if
I
we
know,
can,
it's not a question answer.
if we can get, we'll note that. We'll try to come back to that.
Okay.
But I don't want to create a dialogue here.
Got it.
I mean, I do want to create a dialogue, but
I know, it's
don't
not
want-
the right form, it's not the right form, that's fine.
If everybody comes up and starts asking Craig
I
questions, we're
know,
going to be
we
here all
can't
night.
make any exceptions, it's all good. So I'll make the assumption that procuring the tax credits, applying for them and getting them, and also collaborating with other nonprofits in phase one is smooth sailing, that wouldn't be an issue. The funding that might be needed to reach the goal or meet the vision that you and others have for this parcel and the existing building, whether it stays or doesn't. Those organizations, I know Haven's been aggressively developing campaign funds and they've got funding. So I think that it's worth mentioning at this point that funding wouldn't necessarily be a concern. Clearly, it's going to be a phased project, and how that quickly that happens is not for me to chime in on. But I just really am supportive of this opportunity. I think it would be a really amazing to see something like this happen in Portsmouth, and I don't think there's anything like it across the state. So I vote a solid yes with my little new Portsmouth resident hat on.
Thank you, Lori.
Good evening, Rick Beckstead, 1395 Islington Street. First, I want to thank Craig and the Portsmouth Housing Authority for the presentation. I'm sure probably as people watch this and saw the diagrams, and Craig, when you said the numbers of an 80 to 100 being put into this neighborhood, it is the whole neighborhood. I'm sure people are going to be a little shell-shocked. I would highly recommend what some of the residents of Panaway Manor had actually said, including the entire neighborhood on this, so that we wouldn't have some of the things that happened on Court Street as far as fitting in, not fitting in, that kind of a thing, and what it was going to do to that section of the neighborhood. I would also like to thank Craig for finally debunking, it's the first time that I've heard in a very long time, that adding housing units is going to lower the cost of what rent is. It's the first time that I've actually heard somebody, Craig and I don't agree on everything, but that is one thing I really appreciate, because that is a fallacy that has been preached for many, many years, and we've created many housing projects in the city, not affordable, obviously, market rate, but it doesn't. It escalates it and makes it more. I mean, even our existing, which I have said for the better part of 10 years, to really go and start affordability, we need to protect the housing that we have. We've got places that are being torn down. Multifamilies have been changed and modified. We're very fortunate to have a couple of small little housing areas in Portsmouth that help with some of the lower income. I guess one of my biggest things with this would be simple. if the housing is going to be created, and I'm sure it probably will, I would like Portsmouth Housing Authority to do its number one main challenge, and that is to alleviate some of the names, 600 plus, that are on your waiting list of the housing that you currently have. Last I had heard, it was somewhere around 600, 650. It may have grown because that was at least probably a year from now. I would like to see that. I mean, it's great what was done on Court Street, and you created a new type of a housing, but not one person on that list, when I was on the council of 600 names, no one went into that. And we really need to do a good job with that to be able to go and house those people. I think that's what the main directive of what Portsmouth Housing Authority was all about. You're broadening it, you're changing with the times, but we need to be able to go and create that type of housing. You know, we've done these type of projects before. I watched Lafayette School, and Lafayette School had talked whether it was going to be renovated or not. I know, Craig, it was before your time, but still at the same time, there was talk of doing this very thing. And it was going to alter and change the neighborhood, which is exactly what we're talking about now. I don't want to repeat history with that. So including the neighborhood on that, it was done in such a way that it was finally renovated and done in keeping. And I think there are people in that neighborhood that are going to want to see that for nostalgic point of view or whatever else. I mean, what Haven is actually talking about, being a building contractor for over 30 years, renovating, I know that scares people sometimes, but you're not going to build a brick building like that even today. It can be done. Our middle school was renovated. You know, our high school was renovated to a certain extent. So renovation is, some people say, scary, but a lot of contractors don't want to deal with existing because then they have to alter things. Newer is easier. Start from the ground and work your way up. It's easier. So I just want to go and keep in that. One of the big things, and the mayor had gone and said it, is that softball field. I can tell you, literally, that is we only have 2. Youth. And when I say youth, you're talking about not high school. This is one of 2 in Portsmouth, and the other one is out the PDA that the girls use. That's it. That's all there is. So if we are going to do anything, I certainly hope that that is taken into consideration to be able to go and replace that. The youth programs do not use the large adult one that we have off of Woodbury Avenue. It's a completely different program. And there are a lot of girls, those programs are getting bigger and bigger, and we really need to look after that. It coincides. I guess with anything else, I look forward to what you bring next, and I look forward to you guys hopefully meeting with the neighborhoods and some of the other people there so we can move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rick. Any other?
Hey, Andrew Simonis, 460 Richards Ave. It's really clear that when you talk about this project, obviously there's an interest to maximize the satisfaction of the demand for affordable or workforce housing. And that's cut and dry, very blatant, which is important. But at the same time, you also hear the concerns about the existing neighborhood, which has existed in large part because it's an undisrupted. And it's existed over there in a really nice way. It's also all homogeneous housing inventory, which just means it's all the same type of single-family housing. So I think what you get when you combine the single-family houses with the existing district factory and housing or office park, you get such a contrast. And then you have this middle parcel that has so much ability. But what I think you're getting from the Panaway Manor folks and the rest of the Portsmouth residents is that they don't want to create more juxtaposition to the neighborhood. So the way that I see that being done or achieved is maybe not so much maximizing the number of units, but getting enough units to make it economically feasible while still maintaining a certain level of amenity. And that amenity could be a public rec field, it could be walking trails, it could be a park or a playground, or it could be that same brick building at the front, which acts as a nice transition building to the back of the property, which interrupts however many units you end up doing. And I think maintaining that is one of the highest priorities so that it's not such a contrast. You know, in big cities, it's generally called gentrification, but here in Portsmouth, it would be such a stark contrast. And in downtown, you can kind of blend in buildings. When it's outside of downtown, you have less things to hide it within. So when you're creating a lot of units, it can get overwhelming. Try to mitigate that overwhelming aspect in a single-family neighborhood. Lastly, on the city's behalf, I think one of the most important questions to ask yourself is, on top of cars coming in and out of this property, how else are these people going to move about the area or the city? And even though there are sidewalks and walking trails and all that great stuff, there should be people movers to and from this property so that these affordable housing folks and this demographic can get to where they need to go. Downtown, where there was no parking spaces necessarily allotted or very few, the answer was they can walk. Well, how do we connect this demographic from outside of downtown to where they need to be? And so if that's the question, how many people movers or what type of resource do you have that can satisfy up to 200, 250 new residents and where they need to get to on a daily basis? And I think that applies also for the nonprofits, because their demographic needs to be able to identify where they need to go, how they need to get there, and certainly in times of distress, if need be, how do we get there, and what is our point of reference or identifying a location? And that brick building could act as such.
Thank you very much.
I will just state, there is a bus stop right there, walking distance, like less than a quarter mile. And you can even walk to C&J, too.
Thank you. We heard, and rightfully so, some.
Oh, sorry, I think there's.
Do we still? Sorry, cut you off there.
There's also someone on Zoom.
Good evening. I am Karen Pryor. I'm the Development Director for Haven, and I just wanted to add one piece, putting my fundraising hat on, is that I'm relatively new to Haven, but prior to everything hitting with COVID, Haven invested heavily in doing a deep business plan and feasibility study where dozens of community members were interviewed about the feasibility of a project such as this that Kathy explained, this co-located facility with our housing and our business offices. I think the important thing, too, that Kathy mentioned was that we've been recently just awarded $2 million from community congressionally designated funding, and that has a short timeline. We have 2 years to claim that money, and other than that, it will evaporate. So those funds are either for the acquisition for the land and or for the construction of whatever we're doing. And I would just ask that you would keep that in mind, that we're on a pretty short. We have 2 years, and we have been looking for years for property here in Portsmouth for Haven to stay. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's good. Any other folks in the? All right, not tonight. We're going to have plenty of opportunities on that. We'll go to Ann Hayes.
Go ahead, Ann.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ann Hayes, and I'm the Executive Director at Gather. I know Gather's been mentioned a bit tonight, but for those of you who don't know, our vision and mission is to end hunger in this community through our programs like our pantry market, our mobile farmers markets, our Meals for Kids programs, all of which try and address food insecurity. And we're really excited about the opportunity to have more affordable housing. Housing insecurity and food insecurity often coexist. And this project potentially offers a way to address both of those. Gather has been in Portsmouth for over 200 years, since 1816, and we really want to stay here. But we've outgrown our space, or I should probably say spaces, as we've been adding spaces to try and accommodate our growing program. So we're currently working out of 4 separate spaces, which is super inefficient and challenging for the organization. And like Haven, for the past few years, we've been looking for a space in Portsmouth to locate. We're looking for about 10 to 15,000 square feet so we can bring everything under one roof. We're looking, like Kathy mentioned, that they've been looking at other innovative models. We've been looking at those as well on the food side, and would love to build a community food center, which is based on a really innovative and effective model from up in Canada. But we cannot find the space. We've looked, as we mentioned, for years. We've probably looked at 10 different spaces, and nothing has worked out. There are very few viable options. So it's becoming more and more urgent for us as well to find that new space. And And I would say that the existing Sherburne School building offers, as other people have mentioned, a potential win-win for Gather, for Haven, for the Portsmouth Housing Authority, because we could feasibly locate this community food center in the space alongside Haven's offices, and we could share that community space and programming spaces, making it more cost-effective for both of us. And the proximity to the low income / affordable housing is a real benefit to the residents because the programming that they may need would be close by. And for Gather and Haven, as well as other organizations serving that same community, because we would plan to offer some multi-use spaces to bring in other organizations to provide services, so that people could get housing and workforce development support, enrollment in SNAP and Medicaid, things like that. So when the people are present for programming and meals offered by us or by Haven, they could get that additional support. I think it's been mentioned that now is a really good time for Gather, I know, and for Haven to secure funding for this. In fact, Haven has secured some funding for this. It is a good time for us to be fundraising for this, but we really do want to see this happen sooner rather than later. We're really, we move about 1.8 million pounds of food through our tiny little warehouse and pantry. And so we would love to have additional space to do that. And we think that the school offers the opportunity for us to offer some very cool programming, offers the opportunity for us to address some needs in the community in a much better way, alongside other nonprofits that could do similar work. So we would love to see this happen. The housing is super important, as are the other services that we're talking about. So I really appreciate you taking the time to hear me out, and I thank Craig and the PHA folks for coming up with this idea. I think it's a really interesting opportunity.
Thank you, Ann. Thanks for all the work you do at Gather.
One more speaker, Mayor, Jackie Kelly-Pitts.
Hey, Jackie.
Hi. Sorry to hear you had the flu, Declan. I had COVID.
Oh, geez.
So, yeah, I know. I want to say that I believe and I know that housing is important. I have been blessed to be able to live in Portsmouth as long as I have. And even though I live in Portsmouth housing, every day, believe it or not, I worry about, am I going to be able to stay here? However, there are two things I'd like to bring up. One is building the facility is wonderful, and I think the Sherburne would be a good place. However, maintaining it is something else. And the other question I would bring up, just because I've been involved in building for a long, long time, are we talking close to, I hear $2 million. Are we talking close to $100 million? Craig?
No.
Again, we're going to keep, I know. Right. You want to say no to $100 million, so that's all right.
Well, I'm going to add that we're just building a complex out at the county, and it's $148 million. So in the old days, that kind of money or that kind of figure would knock me on over. But now it doesn't seem so far away. Just saying. But I wish the project would go ahead, and I wish everybody good luck with it. We'll find a place for a softball field.
And as a member of the
Thank
rec
you.
board, that will be part of your job, Jackie.
No joke.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. Okay, so this is the first of many conversations. I think time is of the essence. I want to move as fast as possible, just not any faster than that. I also heard it was great to hear from folks in the neighborhood tonight. We'll make it out to you. City Hall will come to you to hear about this more. I think it was important tonight to be able to live stream this so that people could watch on Channel 22. But it's our goal to make sure that this is something that is a project that everybody's proud of in Portsmouth. But first among all of our equal residents of Portsmouth is going to be the residents that are going to be next to this. So I think we're going to get to a place where we're there. Tonight wasn't a proposal. It was a presentation. And so we got a lot of work to get to a proposal and a lot of work that is going to necessitate. But I want to thank the residents that spoke, and I felt all had an awesomely open mind about this. Certainly some concerns about, hey, we're talking about putting, 40, 80, 120 units next door. I got to imagine that, the Portsmouth of, even 10 years ago might be reacting a little differently to that. It's not because it's not because our feelings of pride in our neighborhoods changed at all. I think it's because our understanding of the crisis that we're in here, when it comes to, families that have been here for generations, to think about, how is my granddaughter going to be here? What are we going to do to keep those people here? How are we going to have our kids be the next generation if they're not living with us? And for folks that want to downsize and get, that single family home and give it to their kids, how are they going to stay close to their grandkids? So I think it's maybe a result of how acute this issue has become. I look forward to all of the discussions that we're going to have on this and to doing some walkabouts. But I think as long as we can get the microphones to work above the HVAC system, I think that it would be a good next step to have a citizen input session at the Sherburne School to hear from these residents, so that people feel as though we're not moving too fast, and we'll make that so it's like our citywide neighborhood committees, maybe more of a Q&A session there, where I think we can get some of the answers that we're looking for, and not maybe this stuffy work session in City Hall. But again, Councilor Bagley?
Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate your comments. And to that vein, and to the concern I expressed earlier, I think the sooner we can do that and the more aggressively we can have these input sessions, maybe we can match that timeline. If we do everything quickly, I know it's budget season, but if we can find a way. The intention to have this session was after the holidays, because I felt like if we had it, in December 22nd, nobody pays attention to anything we do because they're busy doing Christmas shopping, nor should they when the holidays are upon us. You shouldn't be thinking about your government. But now that we've had that, we should, as an agenda item on the 23rd, to schedule that. So I'd look forward to a council bringing forth a date that would work soon thereafter to have that conversation. And I think PHA will be ready for that conversation. Look like you're already ready, and I think that aligns to the timelines of getting this, if it were to happen this year, before the planning board and permit approvals before August. Councilor Blaylock.
Thank you, Your Honor, and I really appreciate you scheduling that and having it at Sherburne School, so the neighborhood does have an opportunity to come and speak. I think tonight was a good starting point to get all some information out there so they can have some questions to come. I did try to speak with some of my neighbors before tonight, just so they were aware of tonight's meeting, but just want to thank you, and I look forward to that.
Thank you, Councilor Blaylock. All right. With that, look forward to the work to come, and I want to thank again Craig, Tom, and Adam, as well as all of the board that was here tonight. We're truly lucky to have you. Look forward to the work that we're going to do together. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you. Thanks, Council.
Rich.
Yeah.